Good evening and welcome to this North West Area Planning meeting held today, 5th of October 2022. My name is Councillor Maddie Thompson and I am Chairman of this committee. Before we commence the business of the meeting, there are a few housekeeping issues to run through. We're streaming this meeting live as well as recording, and by being present in the meeting, you are giving your consent to being recorded. When invited to speak, members, please use the microphone. Speak clearly, referencing a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers. Please keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible and ensure your microphones remain off when not speaking, as this is important for the live streaming to be heard clearly. Finally, can I draw your attention to the notices on the agenda papers regarding the different levels within the chamber and advise that the fire exit is the door behind the top table. Right, members, may I draw your attention to the members' update with further information on item 5 on the agenda. So item 2 is apologies for absence. Ms Casey?
Thank you, Chairman. We received apologies for absence from Councillors Fleming and Sybil.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Item 3 is minutes. It's recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of September, found on pages 7 and 8, are approved as a true and accurate record. May I take them as read, members, for one thing? Okay. I so propose. Seconded. Anybody?
Chair, sorry, can I just say that it was the 7th of September?
Oops. Thank you. I'll be back to you. Right, that was seconded by Councillor Morgan. Thank you. And finally, any matters of accuracy? Yes. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I got the wrong date. They are correct on the agenda papers, though. Yes. Slip of the brain, sorry. Right, so now item 4, declarations of interest. This is now different, no, sorry, this is left over from last time. We have now the correct wording in the published agenda, but I'll read it anyway. To disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests relating to items of business on the agenda having regard to paragraph 9 and appendix B of the Code of Conduct for members. And members are reminded they're also required to disclose any such interests as soon as they become aware, should the need arise through the meeting. Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chairman. Although other councillors say it's not necessary, I will declare another registrable interest as a member of Essex County Council who are statutory consultees. And in the interest of openness and transparency, I was aware of the applicant when I was in the golf business, but that is not for the last 10 years, and it was a business acquaintance, nothing more than that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? No. Okay, so item 5, which is our first and indeed only planning application, is the golf driving range, Burnham Road, Woodham, Mortimer. There is the members' update, as I said earlier, on that. We do have the agent to speak after the presentation, so Mrs Herner, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an outline application with all matters reserved for up to 18 residential units. The proposal would also involve the demolition of the existing building on the site and the removal of the driving range and pitch and putt use. So here we have the location plan, the site outlined in red, measuring approximately 3.4 hectares. The indicative layout plan, because as I've said, it's all matters reserved. And there's an area of public open space proposed within the site. A mix of 2, 3 and 4 bed units are proposed. There's going to be 8 affordable housing units, which would be 4.4% over and above the requirement. This basically takes the policy requirement 7.2 units and 8 would be delivered. This is considered to be a de minimis figure and doesn't provide significantly above the policy requirement. It's also worth noting at this stage that policy H5 has been referenced within the submission. That's the rural exception scheme policy, which the application hasn't been put forward as, and there's been no evidence submitted with the application in respect of local need to meet those policy requirements. There'll be some additional tree planting across the site and within the area of public open space. There's an existing public footpath along the western boundary of the site to Conduit Lane, and which could provide access to the bus stops, but it's unlikely that this footpath would be used for this reason, due to it being unlit and involving walking within a road. So it's considered that users would probably be deterred from using it in dark times or in periods of inclement weather. Oops. It's also worth noting, although the layout is indicative, we don't consider there to be much room for change due to the number of units proposed, the needs for SUD scheme, the public open space, and for it to be set back from Burnham Road. So officers have concerns over the spread of development and the encroachment of built form in the countryside and the visibility from public vantage points, particularly from the footpath and Burnham Road. So here we have the tree constraints plan. So the majority of trees to be removed are in the footprint of where the houses are shown. So just thought it relevant to highlight the site history to you. So there's been 2 previous applications at the site for 25 units, and they were refused due to impacts on the character and appearance of the area, the accessibility and sustainability credentials of this site, the unjustified loss of employment, tourist, community and sports and leisure uses, and the lack of a signed Section 106 agreement for the various different contributions. One other application in 2017 was dismissed on appeal, which was for 8 dwellings. At the time of the 2021 application, the council couldn't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and so the considerations in that respect are the same for this application. It was previously considered that 25 units would not offset the harm as a result of the inappropriate and unsustainable location, the loss of the employment generating, the loss of the employment use, the community, tourism and sport facility. This scheme proposes lesser units, and therefore it's considered that the existing lawful use still has a greater community benefit than the proposed. So just for your reference, this is the 2017 application layout for the 8 units, the 2020 for the 25, and the 2021 for the 25. So here I have some photos of the site access, sort of within the access and around it. Photos looking out from the access onto Burnham Road, within the driving range, and then you have the building for that purpose here, and the pitch and putt section of the site. So the location is considered to be unsustainable and inaccessible, so there'll be a reliance on the use of the private motor car. The proposal would fundamentally alter the open character of the southwestern edge of the village, failing to provide a visual enhancement to the wider rural locality. It would represent the encroachment of built form into the rural site and the sprawl of development into the open countryside. It's not considered that the loss of the employment use, community facility, tourism facility and sports and leisure facility has been justified. You're also aware of the members' update that adds an additional reason for refusal in relation to ecology, because the information's outdated, so we can't be sure that there won't be detrimental impacts on protected species. And so in consideration of the above, it's not considered that there are new material considerations in respect of the previous application that would alter the council's stance on this application or overcome those concerns, and so it's recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So, Mr. O'Toole, if you'd like to come forward, please pick any chair you like. Please use the microphone. Someone will help you with that if you like. You have 2 minutes precisely, and I'm afraid I am very precise, but it starts when you begin to speak.
Okay, good evening. The council is significantly failing to provide a 5-year housing land supply, and themselves determined the site was sustainable and should be developed back in 2015. The scheme has received overwhelming support from the council's own consultees, who have explicitly welcomed the provision of much needed affordable housing. Additionally, there's been overwhelming support from the parish council and the surrounding neighbourhood. The officer's report significantly downplays the sustainability of the site. Walking, cycling, public transport and private vehicle are all viable routes of travel to and from this site. There's a local network of public footpaths connecting the site to bus stops that are serviced by frequent bus routes, not just the one outlined in the officer's report. As stated in the officer's report, a council appraisal in 2021 determined that the development would have a minimal impact on the wider landscape. Significant additional soft landscaping and tree planting is proposed, which will have huge environmental and ecological benefits. Open green space also forms part of the proposal, facilities which will benefit the wider community. The viability of the business is dwindling and costs of maintaining the site are skyrocketing. Evidence has been provided that there is a wealth of other golf facilities within the borough. The existing use is detrimental to neighbouring properties. The site is no longer fit for use. In fact, a golf ball went through a neighbour's window this weekend. The application explicitly states that affordable housing will be provided, and a draft Section 106 agreement was included within the design and access statement. The client cannot progress with legal agreements until the number of units and the housing mix is agreed. This is the council's policy and is to be resolved as part of a reserved matters application. As well as providing much needed housing for the borough, the proposed development would bring significant improvements to the surrounding neighbours and wider village community. The benefits far outweigh the perceived concerns, and this application should be granted permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect timing too. Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of that? Yeah. Okay. Right. Members, I've got you first, Councillor Durham.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. And members, I apologise for bringing you out on a Thursday night just for this one item, which Wednesday night.
Wednesday.
Okay, sorry.
It seems like Thursday.
It does seem like Thursday. You've no idea. But I did feel that there were adequate reasons why this should be brought to committee. Can we bring up the site plan, please, with the... the next one up. Yeah, that one, yeah. Okay, so the first point I will make is that it's actually quite a natural infill with the rest of the village. And in terms of the settlement boundary, it actually does run along one side of this, if not two sides of this particular proposed development. I just want to address one or two of the things in the officer's report, and I'm very sorry to pick holes in the report. But firstly, I contest that actually this is a sustainable location. I mean, I know there are no shops, there are no facilities in Woodham, Mortimer, but it's exactly 475 metres from the nearest bus stop, which is not, I wouldn't have said, terribly far, which is on the A414, which is the main route between Chelmsford and Malden. The agent has mentioned damage to local properties, and when I was in the same business, I had exactly the same issue. The fundamental problem with the current driving range as such, and I'm not sorry to say that I'm an expert in this, but the golf has changed significantly. Golf equipment has changed significantly in the last 20 years. And anybody watching it on television will see in that the improvement in equipment means that people hit the ball much, much further. And this is a very old driving range, and it fundamentally is just too short. So that is why balls are going over the existing fence. In the officer's report, it did mention doubling the height of the fence, and I accept the fact that that would stop balls from going over the fence to a certain extent, but people aren't going to pay to hit balls into a fence. It's completely pointless. So I'm afraid that the Times has caught up with this as a viable driving range. In terms of it being a tourist attraction, come on, I really don't think that it is a valid tourism operation, and I speak as the chairman of Visit Essex, and it's not something that features terribly in the tourism spectrum. Also, by all accounts, and actually, Chairman, I should declare an interest in that I have bought a gas cylinder there this winter. So one gas cylinder, so apologies for that, because it does supply...
Presumably not at a discounted rate because of your position on the council.
I wish it was. Have you seen the price of Calagas? Thank you very much indeed.
You're just another customer.
I'm just another customer because it's too expensive at Dows. It's too expensive everywhere now. But anyway, there's just appears to be one lad working there who runs around doing all sorts of everything. So I don't actually think it's a very significant employment opportunity. And I wouldn't say that the business would support more than a couple of staff anyway. Then we come to the ecology. Now, this is an area of closely mown grass that not only has a mower across it, probably in the summer, in the growing season, twice a week, but in order to pick the balls up, you either have a tractor or a similar device, and the ball collecting machine has large plastic discs. So the chance of anything surviving more than about 2 minutes on there is slightly, well, it would be very unlikely. They'd be very unlikely. Anything bigger than a golf ball would be very unlikely to survive. In fact, even then, smaller. So, I don't really accept that there's a terribly valid ecological objection to this. Fundamentally, the parish council, and the main reason I call it in, the parish council are completely in support of it, as are pretty much all of the surrounding neighbours. And in terms of visual impact, actually from the Burnham Road, the existing building is not the most desirable, and I think it would actually be an improvement. So, Chairman, and going back over the planning history, somewhere in the depths of my mind, and the agent did hint to it, was the fact that I think there was it assessed with about 70 houses potential initially, whether that was a pre-app or whether that was in the original Schlar.
Sorry.
That sticks in my mind. I mean, this is a big site. The difference between this one and the previous application that was turned down for 8 houses, and you might say 8 would be better than 25, but when you look at it, they were 8 humongous great houses, which quite honestly is not what the people in the village wanted. So the mix of these is actually fits in with what is required in the village. And I think if you go on to Rightmove, you would find it impossible to find a house for sale in Woodham, Mortimer less than £1 million. In fact, I know you wouldn't. So, there is local need for these. And so, Chairman, that is the reason why I think that we should make an exception. I would like to hear from Mr. Lee or the officer whether this will make us, I'm not going to use the word significant, an impact to our 5-year land supply issue. I would have said it must do. I mean, it's not hundreds of houses, but it probably would help, I would guess. So, Mr. Lee is looking at, got he's got the look on his face, and I would actually like to take this opportunity to say we're really sorry that you're going to be leaving us, Mr. Lee, because. No, okay. I must say, over the 8 years, you've been an absolutely excellent officer, and we've had many a conversation, and we haven't always agreed, but you will be a great loss to the authority. But anyway, that's enough schmoozing to Mr. Lee. But
I don't think it's going to work.
No, I don't think. Chairman, I had absolutely no expectation that it would, and I know exactly where Mr. Lee is going to come from. But I do think that there are significant factors in this that means it should be supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a whole row of people to speak. Do you want to come?
It might be easier. It's quite a few questions.
Mrs.
there.
Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. So in terms of the bus service and sustainability, it's probably best to deal with those together. So the bus service, as I understand, is only an hourly service to Malden and runs only from 8 a.m. till 5:30. So it would give limited options for those trying to get to and from work. Part of the main concern is that you would need to access the bus stop on Conduit Lane is the most limited service, but both that bus stop and the one on Bryant's Lane would need to be accessed through the public footpath through the site, which were the concerns in relation to being unlit and not a sort of a desirable option for those looking to travel on foot. In terms of sustainability, the village itself is one of the smaller villages with limited services and facilities, so wouldn't provide everything that people need for day-to-day living. So although the site is adjacent to the settlement boundary, as you said, there's quite a lot of housing to be put onto that village in itself. In terms of the golf need, it's not been demonstrated that, the level that is being used to a sufficient amount for us to be able to determine that, it's not a worthwhile and well used, what's the phrase I'm looking for, commodity to the district. But also in terms of it being a tourist sport or a sport facility or community facility, we potentially, I'm not saying we definitely could, but would look to support something else on that site within those uses, and that hasn't been explored. So the policy looks for it to be marketed for other options falling within those uses before we allocate it for housing, and we haven't had any evidence as part of that. In terms of ecology, there are trees within the site and hedges surrounding the site. So the point with ecology is just that the survey is outdated, and we just can't be sure at the moment that there isn't any protected species on the site that could be affected. They could come out at night. Just for clarity, the employee numbers in the application form were 1 full-time and 3 part-time staff. And respect of the SHLA, the site was put forward in the recent call for sites and was deemed to be unsuitable for development, and it was never allocated through the last local plan period either for housing, so anything, the previous SHLA would carry no weight at this point. The last point I think was in relation to the impact on the 5-year housing land supply. The number of units would be considered fairly limited in terms of its benefits for the 5-year supply. There is that very slight over provision of affordable housing, but other than that, there isn't any benefits that would be over and above what we would normally expect to see of a planning application. And planning applications of this size unfortunately don't bring forward more substantial benefits in terms of education contributions, transport contributions, things like that. So it is a limited number that wouldn't substantially alter that. Thank you.
Can I just come back on one point, Chairman, if that's okay? Just in relation to the bus services, as members will know, tomorrow there's a Malden District Future Transport Strategy Members Workshop, which is part of the Essex County Council Sustainable Transport Strategy, which is all about getting people out of their cars onto buses. So what the bus service we have now is unlikely to be the same bus service as we have when this strategy is published. So that is a moving feast, if you like. I hear what the officer says, and I now wait with bated breath to hear what Mr. Lee says.
Yes, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to make a couple of points, a bit more strategic than specifically on the points that Ms. Herner raised. What I always say, as always, is we're here to make decisions on evidence as planning officers. We're not and decision makers. That's whether it's the committee, delegated, the inspector. A lot, as Ms. Herner said, and the officer's report explains, there's a lot of submission, but not necessarily a lot of evidence as part of the application. And with all due respect to Councillor Durham, a lot of what he said is opinion-based rather than factual evidence-based, because what the point is, we do not have the evidence in front of us as decision makers to make those informed, definitive conclusions. It may well be we all think this is likely to be the answer, but without that evidence, we cannot make that decision categorically. And for example, the point about the employment and the golf course, etc., the policy doesn't require it that it has to be a golf course. There are lots of other opportunities it could be, but they haven't marketed it to even see if anyone is interested in providing any of those facilities or community uses or employment opportunities. Would actually be where the policy directs development to before moving it to housing. Housing was basically the last option in our policy, and none of the other considerations have been brought forward. I'll jump to Councillor Durham's last point because Ms. Herner's not had a chance to respond to that. And in relation to what may be in the future and policies in the future, and it's a moving feast. Unfortunately, we're eating today, though. We need to eat what is in front of us, and the evidence is what is in front of us and what we are, where we are now. What may happen in the future is not a consideration for us today in this decision. The other point, just to add a couple of points onto what Ms. Herner did say, I'd highlight, as you know, Ms. Herner said that the site is a smaller village. There's a large selection of smaller villages within our policy SA, including Tulsant Darcy, Tulsant Major, Tillingham, Tulsant, Stomaris, Little Tottenham, etc. There is a lot of these villages. And if we are to accept that we are going to build houses in these sites and consider them sustainable, one, they have no facilities and a very limited bus service, that is the same for every single village. It's not just for this application, it's for every application. And remember, that is not one house or two houses, that is whether it's 1 or 400 houses. If we consider these villages sustainable as decision makers, they are sustainable for the council. And every application we have that comes before us will have to have the right respect to have the same considerations applied to the application. And this is why I always raise concerns with throwing the baby out with the bathwater in our policies, because they do reflect and impact on every single application we have. And also in relation to Councillor Drummond's point about the SLAR, it's 7 years old now. We didn't give it weight then. We won appeals when we didn't give it weight, when the applicants tried to. And what I'd also say is the call for sites is much more recent. And if we're going to give the SLAR that's 7 years old weight, we'll have to start giving all the sites that have been positively allocated within the call for sites a lot of weight. And I would say that is a very dangerous consideration for members to start doing, because there's a lot of sites that have been green lighted through that process. And if we start giving weight to the SLAR from all that time ago, we're going to have to start doing that now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Very briefly,
I can
please,
come
'cause
back.
I've got 3 hours.
I'm addressing the comments that Mr. Lee said. I would probably count myself as an expert witness in respect of the golf industry. At the time, this was more than 10 years ago, we had a driving range facility that was of a similar length, and it was just too short, and it cost, you actually have to buy short range golf balls that don't fly as far, and nobody wants to do it because it's not the real game. So, you know, that side of things, you know, yes, it is not suitable. Bearing in mind that just down the road at Three Rivers at Cold Norton, which is just down the other end of the road, is a big driving range with floodlights. And unfortunately, for these facilities, you have to have floodlights so that you are viable in the evening. So you have Three Rivers, you have Crondon Park, which you can see from the other side of the A12. The time has moved on, the business has moved on. And as another example of the fact that the golf industry is in decline, and there, as you might remember, Chairman, the Warren put in an application to remove some of their golf holes because simply that part wasn't viable, although we are appealing that decision quite rightly, but on different matters. But thank you, I'll shut up now.
Come back, yes.
Sorry, all I want to be, obviously I wasn't very, obviously from Councillor Dartmouth's response, obviously I apologise, I wasn't clear in my thing. But the policy doesn't say it has to be retained as a golf course. It just says there are other things that could be done before it goes to housing. No comment I made related to it being retained as a golf course. So if that wasn't clear, I apologise. Our policies just say that there should be employment, tourism, community facilities, etc. across the board and the breadth of what they could be, rather than going to housing first. So if I wasn't clear, I do apologise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. All right, I've got Councillor Morgan, Councillor White, and then Councillor Morley. So, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes. Firstly, can I also say how sorry I am to hear Mr. Lee's leaving us. That's even though a short period being here, I've got a great deal of respect for what he's been able to do. But I have to say and endorse my fellow councillors Durham's remarks here, and I really am particularly persuaded by the fact that the parish council is supporting this, and indeed a number of other local residents are. I mean, we don't have NIMBYs here, we've actually got YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard. And I think that in terms of the sustainability, and I take the point that Mr. Lee has said in regards to evidence, but I don't actually see, to be perfectly honest, from my reading of it, that the evidence of unsafe sustainability is actually made here. There are facilities there. There's a pub in the village. There's a coffee shop. Indeed, there's the garden centre. It's very close to Danbury. I don't see that's sustainable. It is unsustainable at all. And so also, you say that it should be, if there's going to be anything put on here instead of a golf driving range, it should be some other sports facility, but or some other. I'm at a loss to think what you could put on there, to be honest, unless you sort of build a huge gymnasium or something. So I have to say that I think that in fact, I'm sort of at a loss at a time when, we have no 5-year land supply, there is a call for sites, etc. Somebody's come forward and a village has been prepared to put 18 houses in it. Why are we not biting their arm off at the shoulder? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I've got quite a few things I could say to that, but Mrs. Hurner.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify the Parish Council's comment. So they have ticked we raise no objection but wish to make the following comment box in the response form, which isn't listed as being in support of the application. They note that the previous applications were generally supported by themselves with concerns and recommendations. They've resolved again to support the application, but as it's understood that many nearby residents would welcome the cessation of the current activities currently causing nuisance, wayward golf balls and light pollution. And then there's some concerns about surface water. I think that just highlights what myself and Mr. Lee have said about the parish concerns appear to me to be, without speaking on their behalf, but from reading this, is that these are the activities that they want to see to the site, and that doesn't mean for me that we need to put housing on the site. There are many options that we could explore, and with regards to what you were saying about what could go on there's under the community facility policy, there is a number of things listed in there. Of course, it is seen as a sport facility as well, so if we can retain that, then great, but there are quite a few different community facilities that fall under that definition that won't need to be in the same sort of vein as what's there at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Through you, Chairman, just on that point, I'd say it's not before us as a committee, so we can't give that any weight, as always. Secondly, what I would like to say, and I would very much like to highlight, as I have said a million times in committees, and hopefully not many more times.
Don't be like that.
Planning is not the X factor. We're not here to determine applications on popularity. Case law is clear that we are here to make applications based on policies, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and popularity, both for and against an application, is not a material consideration of any weight. So whether or not the principle of the public, parish, anybody else is either for or against an application is not a material consideration. It's the quality of the comments that are raised, not the volume, that is the important fact. So I know what Councillor Morgan said, but please do not take that, Councillor Morgan, into thought when you come to vote on this application, because that is something that case law has said is not a material consideration in determination of an application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I have a concern myself, but if we're saying it's sustainable, as Mr. Lee's just said, that applies to 400 the same as 18. It just does. And in fact, we've got an appeal upcoming in our village, Councillor Morley, Tolls St Knights, for 97 houses. And so if we're saying that Woodham Mortimer is sustainable, why won't the inspector find that Tolls St Knights is sustainable? Well, it's possible they may do. It's possible they may do, but, well...
Through you, Chairman, full point. Every decision this committee makes, or the council makes, is a material consideration. If we start making decisions that say that the threshold for sustainability is much lower than we historically have taken, that will become the position. As members that were here at the time of the last 5-year land supply said, we lost a lot of appeals towards the end because inspectors were being convinced that the council was being inconsistent on its determination of sustainability, and we lost a lot of appeals on the fact that agents were able to evidence that. And what I would say is, as we know, now they're all online, agents are watching a lot more committees, are able to see much more of our decisions, and we are seeing, and Turner can agree, regularly where there's an inconsistency, particularly through committees, than being referenced in appeals, because people are able to review them much quicker and easier than historically they could do, due to the fact they had to be in the chamber historically. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, I've got Miss White next. Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, my comments really, I've been going through the policy map, and for me, under S1, a lot of it is previously developed land, which is where we should be basing any building decisions. And I would say that every planning application should be determined on its own merits. So, what else comes before us I can't talk about. I only talk about what's here tonight. I believe it is sustainable because there is bus stops, there are local businesses, and we have allowed a local development lately that was a business which is just over the road. under Part 9 of S1, it says that we'll conserve and enhance the natural environment to get a net increase in biodiversity. Now, I know that regardless of the report, mowed grass has very little nature or biodiversity gains or benefit because it is mowed, so it's not conducive to nature. And the agreement is down to the authority to do a careful agreement of a new biodiversity measure will add a benefit to what is already there, so therefore it's a net gain. This is also applicable to policy N1 and N2, which is green infrastructure gains, maximising opportunities for on-site and the wider community, and policy N2, which is biodiversity gains, no net loss and gains on site. Well, this, if we manage the biodiversity carefully, this will be a huge gain because it needs to be mixed increases. So that's something that I think we can do, and I think depending on what the decision is, that's something that would need to be decided by officers or members, or probably officers, to get the gain that we need. Part 5, bus stops and local businesses. I mean, let's face it, Danbury's pretty easy to get the bus stop from, and again, it is only just across the road. We've also had various appeals that stated that it was reasonable for rural areas to use a car, and we've lost on appeal on that point. I can't remember which application it was. Then we go on to policy S3, which is place shaping. You know, the neighbours are keen to gain public access to land which is not currently available to the public, so for me that's a gain on S3, part 2. Where places where people want to live and interact through active citizenship. So because we're actually creating additional green space. So for me, that's a positive rather than a negative. Policy H2, it is, if I'm correct, increasing affordable housing, which is, so that for me complies with that policy, because we keep being told we've got to do it policy H2 on policies. So I've been going through the policies while I've been sitting here this evening. Even though I'm jet lagged, I'm still going through policies. And policy H4, interestingly, 5.26, it says it's happy to build on smaller scale housing developments if they will develop affordable housing. So that's something that I think would be interesting to look into. No doubt we'll be told why that's not applicable. And then again, policy N1, green infrastructure gains. Yeah, that for me, that box is ticked. It's maximised opportunities for on-site and the wider community, because currently, excluding the footpath, the public can't access it. So that's another one. And part 2, policy N2, the biodiversity gains, no net loss and gains on site. I mean, if we're careful, we could get a massive biodiversity increase on here. And I think, depending on what the decision is, we should put this for future discussion, because we could make this a really, really big gain. So for me, personally, depending on what comes back from the officers, the the benefit outweighs any perceived harm, and every application is on its merits. So for me, that's where I am.
I'll come back on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Through you, Chairman. I'll just say that personally, I think most of the points Councillor White's highlighted where it's in compliance with policy are neutral, such as affordable housing that's required to be there. It's not actually a benefit, their requirements. But what I would highlight is that, particularly reason for refusal, where it talks about E1, E3, E5 and N3, there's been no discussion about the conflict with those, and to give a scheme basically saying it's got housing, it's got affordable, there can be net gain, etc. Let's not worry about employment, let's not worry about the rules of the employment land, our community facilities, etc., is a very dangerous decision, because while each application on its own merit, you still need to talk about this application. And I think the actual harm that is highlighted in the officer's report has been discussed by Ms Herner, by myself, is, even if you just look at reason refusal 3, is there, and taking such a broad brush approach to say that there are net gain, affordable housing, etc., is a reason to go against those 4 policies would be very dangerous for every other application that is on employment land or is on community land. And secondly, as Ms Herner explained previously, H5 relates to a rural exception site, and this isn't a rural exception site. They haven't done the evidence to it, the specific need for the board, etc. So that is a moot point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I do still have a problem with it. There's no advertising. That's part of the policy, and that's a requirement. It's not happened. And, you know, a couple of months ago, committee as a whole made a decision to support a business in the countryside, and now we're making sure the land is lost to a business. Right, I have got Councillor Moore. Oh, sorry, Mr. Turner, yeah.
So just in respect of the point of net biodiversity gain, and I think it's important to consider the ecology. Our ecology consultant has said that this site has the potential to impact on priority species. They've said that under our statutory duty that we need to be considering this prior to the determination of the application. So although there might be a net biodiversity gain, by approving this there could be detrimental impacts on ecology that can't be reversed, and we don't have any mitigation, an up-to-date preliminary ecological appraisal to condition. You know, there could be bats in the trees and things like that we could be impacting on.
Thank you. Right, I will come back to you, Councillor Durham, but not yet, because it's Councillor Morley, followed by Councillor Stevens. And
thank you, Chairman. Just to Mr. Lee, as a general rule of thumb, if you have a business like that, are you really meant to offer it to other businesses first before you go for planning? And also, because it's not farmland, does that give it weight to, thank you.
Through you, Chairman. I'll answer those questions backwards, if that's okay. The site is previously developed land, which obviously is where we would encourage development. That isn't just housing, that is any form of development. You then move on to our policies, which looks to protect the various uses we have, whether it's employment, community facilities, etc., because there's a need for them. If there is an evidence lack of a need, so you would do marketing, etc., then there is an acceptance that they will be lost. But it's a point of going through, getting over those hurdles, and this applicant hasn't submitted that. What I would use as an example is the Woodham police station, where application came in to use it for residential development. We refused it on lack of evidence, and that they'd actually tried to market it at too high a value, actually. And we won that appeal. And subsequently, we've now had an application for it to be converted into employment land. So we shouldn't assume, because part of their submission was, no one will want this for employment land. We aren't here to make assumptions. We're here to make decisions based on evidence, and there is a silence on these facts. And it's very dangerous, I would say, for members to make decisions to go against our employment policies, and all these other policies based on assumptions and how you feel. It may be in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, we're back here with a different recommendation on those points, but until they've done that evidence, we should not, as decision makers, be ignoring that requirement, because it will undermine every single application we have on employment land, etc. And as I said, this will become the council standard. We will just be ignoring parts of the policy, and that is, you know, I know we're doing local plan review, but in reality, the local plan is still quite young. It's only 5 years old, and we shouldn't be taking that approach, is my advice, members.
Thanks. Actually, I've a couple of questions. It's been refused before on various numbers of houses. Has anything changed that has made it sustainable when there was a reason for refusal before?
No, there's no new material considerations that change our stance.
Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Stevens followed by Councillor Keys. And if we haven't set up our sleeping bags, I'll come back to you, Councillor. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I feel a bit like if you were in a courtroom and the judge was saying, you've got to ignore that, just don't hear that he said that. You would have to ignore it. And every time I come to these meetings, we seem to just go, well, yeah, I know it says it's only a small unsustainable village in the LDP, but, well, actually, I don't really believe in that. We can't do that. If we've got policies, we have to stick by them. If we change our LDP, well, then that's the moment we can say, yeah, let's put all the development into this village. We'll make it a sustainable village and let's throw bricks at it. Well, we can do that. We've got the power to do that. But that's not where we are at the moment. As Mr. Lee and Ms. Hannah have said, there isn't the evidence. And I think I would look at this application again in time to come if different evidence comes forward with a different mindset. But right now, I can't see any evidence because there isn't any. It's not compliant with our policies that would allow it. We've heard all the reasons why, and I think we need to think really, really carefully before we just chuck those policies out of the window, or they become worthless. And next time we'll just have to say yes to anything else that comes, and we'll keep saying yes, and we'll get built over. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keys.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sometimes I come to these meetings, I say quite a lot of times I come to these meetings. Now last week, I think all of us bar Councillor White sat in looking at a garden suburb. Now that is what I would class as a garden suburb. Now the one down the road, Malden Council said we should approve the recommendation for all these houses, and there was all complaints about you couldn't get the dust cart emergency services down there. All these houses, from what I can see in here, have all got garages, and from what I can see up there, have all got off-road parking. This is brownfield site, the one down the road that we passed, and you can argue sustainability. I might be in 50 in November, but I wouldn't want to walk from Morrison's, which I class as sustainable, to get me shopping back to that development with 3 or 4 bags of shopping. Now, this brownfield site, greenfield site down the road, we've got to look at it like this. That is nice. It's in a village, it's on the edge, it's virtually surrounded by houses. As Councillor Durham says, it's in the village envelope. Borders the village envelope. It's cut grass. We've got a wildlife area there now, which will probably grow longer grass. And as my fellow members have said, cut grass has got no, apart from the odd anthill, you are not going to have any sort of animal on there. This is nice. I like this. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Firstly, I'd be very reluctant to hear the phrase, this is nice, I like this in committee again, please, members. You know, what I'm hearing is you're here to determine application in accordance with policy unless material considerations can. Whether I like this and think this is nice or not is irrelevant, and it's irrelevant for every decision maker. You are here to determine application in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So, as always, I say, can you please be very conscious of the terminology and wording you use, because we aren't here to decide what's nice or not nice. We're here to look at policies. We're not here to go, I think that's pretty or that's that, unless we're obviously coming down to design aspect. In relation to Councillor Keyes' point about the garden suburbs, first, obviously, the garden suburb is a lot bigger quantum of development than this, so I don't think it's a directly comparable. But also, the reason is that the government require us to deliver a certain amount of housing, and it should be dealt with through the plan-led system. Malden District Council, when it submitted the local planning 2014, had chosen the approach of delivering garden suburbs. So the quantum of housing that we needed as a district was decided to be delivered through developments attached to Haybridge, Malden and Burnham. That was the way we decided to do it, and that is why we have allocated sites. That is why we had the reserve matters, outline applications, etc., and additional developments for those. That was the way we have chosen to deliver housing. It's accepted, I think, by anybody that if you're going to build a house, whether it's 1 or 100, there's going to be some level of harm. And you have to make the judgment of how you cause that harm or where there's the less harm. And Malden District Council, before I worked here, so, you know, I'll leave that to Councillor Thompson, Councillor Dartman, Councillor White, I think, only to comment on that. But that was the options that the council decided. Whether or not you agree with it's irrelevant. That is the situation of we have allocated sites and we are delivering housing through that way. This is not an allocated site. It's a completely different situation, and you should not compare an allocated site to a windfall site. You can't compare a site for how many thousand houses to a site for 18 houses. And I just advise members not to do that. And there was a third point Councillor Keyes raised, and I can't remember what it was. So ecology, yeah. And as I would say is that, okay, as grass may be cut, but remember that there are a number of trees on this site that will be removed. Secondly, things such as bats, etc., don't live in the grass, so they may well interact with the site. We just, you know, ecology have raised that this site could have protected species. To say that there isn't, because we don't think there is sitting here, is the issue. There is not evidence before us to confirm there isn't. So irrespective of what you feel about any of the other reasons for refusal, I'd be very concerned with us sitting around this table to decide we are experts on the issue of ecology when our supposed experts that we pay money to give us consultation are saying they don't have enough evidence to make that decision. And that would just be my comment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Durham, Councillor Moore.
I'm just going to take up that point about trees, because the right-hand side of that development is currently a golf driving range, and we've seen the photographs of it. So those trees shown on the plan are new trees. It's a completely flat grassed area. The left-hand side is the pitch and putt, and those existing trees are there. I think they're going to stay there. So you're exchanging what you see in the right-hand side of the site from a flat grassed field. I'm just going to raise the High Court case of Dartford Borough Council versus the Secretary of State in 2015, which looks at the diversifying land in the countryside, and they held that residential gardens outside of built-up areas were brownfield land and not greenfield land. This is significant because paragraph 111 of the MPPF provides that brownfield land ought to be prioritised, and the presumption in favour of sustainable development kicks in. And that's a High Court. I can give you the reference number for the for that High Court judgment.
Through you, Chairman, for clarity, this is a golf range, so is not a person's garden. Secondly, I've already said this is previously developed land. Thirdly, I've said our policy accepts that but directs it to other forms of development before residential, and then we'll only accept residential when these other things have lacked evidence to be delivered. So that piece of case law, I would say, has zero relevance to this application because this is a golf course and the council has accepted it's previously developed land. It's not a garden, and we're not trying to argue it isn't previously developed land. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just make the point that with regard to the officers, and indeed Councillor Stevens' point, is that certainly from my point of view, I'm not ignoring the council's planning policies. I just don't think, with great respect to the officers, that they are actually applying them properly or in the right way. I believe that in fact, with the sustainability aspect, we've already stated there is a sustainability argument. Mr. Lee spoke about the question of employment. I mean, I can't see how a golf driving range, which is at the moment, which probably only employs sort of one person, I think, sort of picking things up, etc., as opposed to a village development which could, encourage all sorts of further employment matters like gardens and various other things. I appreciate he says that there could be some other employment site on there, but what? I mean,
We don't know without advertising.
So this is, I think, a far better way of utilising the site to the benefit of all. Thank you, Madam.
But the policy requires a sequential test that it will be advertised, and that means every time any of these things comes forward, we're straight into, well, that one didn't advertise. So we've been there with the barns at Tottenham, which, to be fair, you won't remember, but we had barns that should have been advertised, weren't, and now they're houses. Sorry, Surname.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in relation to the sustainability point, I think it's probably worth drawing members' attention to the Rural Facility Survey that was published this year. So the settlements are set out in a hierarchy. So you start with your larger villages. The highest is Southminster, for instance, that scores 220 points. You then have your medium villages, starting with Bradwell at 69. Smaller villages, Tulsa Major with 40. Down, and then you have hamlets and open countryside where Woodham Mortimer scores 26 and is noted to just have a shopper and commuter bus service and is 15 minutes away from a railway. And there's only a handful of villages that are scored lower than that village. I think that just highlights the... and just on the relation of how officers are applying the policies, just to take policy 3, for example, community services and facilities, the policy says that it needs to be demonstrated to the council's satisfaction that the existing business and service is not and cannot be made viable, and effective marketing has not been undertaken to demonstrate that there is no viable and appropriate alternative community service-based use. And I don't think that's subjective. I think that requires the evidence, which we haven't seen here. And it's paragraph 4.29 of that policy. It lists different community services and facilities, which includes education facilities, cultural facilities, healthcare, sporting, local green spaces. There are other options that could be explored that haven't been. Thank you.
Right, I've got Councillor Stevens and Councillor White again, and then I'm going to look for a proposal. No, so we're going to go round and round. That's actually not supposed to be round. We're all here for the whole district. Right, Councillor Stevens, then Councillor White, and then, if please do make the proposal.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you've both just said the points that I would have said, which is there is no evidence. I've said it already, and you've said it, and I'll say it again, that we haven't got the evidence. When you say what else might it be used for, well, that's not up to us to find out. We've got the experts sitting here in this room advising us here, and I just think it's appalling if we then simply ignore them, and I would urge people to listen to what our experts are saying to us, to think about our policies and what they say. If you don't like the policy, our LDP review process is the place to amend it. We shouldn't just ignore it and say, oh, well, I don't like this bit of it today, so I think I'll approve this planning application. I would just urge people to really think carefully and not ignore the expertise we have in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm just quite pleased that, or surprised that the officer has agreed that it calls the policy S1 because it is previously developed land. And while this has been going on, I've just had a jog to my memory that when the Three Rivers put in to build the housing there, I'm pretty sure we refused that at committee and we lost it at appeal. And they didn't give any reasons for why it was sustainable. And their nearest shop is probably a mile away. And their nearest pub is probably 800 kilometres away. And there's nothing else in Coldmont. There used to be a post office. There used to be all sorts of things. But obviously as time goes on, they all close down. So for me, it is previously developed land. And we didn't ask Three Rivers for viability reports and anything else and whether the business was sustainable, and we lost that at appeal. We turned it down at committee. I'm sure we did. So I'm a bit jet lagged, so brain's not working, but I'm pretty sure that we did. So it seems to be we don't have a 5-year land supply, and it's even harder to get planning now and more onerous than it was when we did have a 5-year housing land supply.
Mr. Lee.
Through you, Chairman, first I would say it's, from a professional point of view, it's not more onerous to get 5-year land supply. It's just that we're probably getting a lot of applications that would never have been submitted to us if we had a 5-year land supply. Also, to my knowledge, Three Rivers is still a functioning business. So, if any, and I don't know the applications in front that Councillor White's referencing, as I always say, if people would like to discuss applications as part of an agenda, part of discussion, they let officers know in advance, so we're able to comment on them. So I'd advise that members give very limited weight to that decision. But what I would say is, if I'm correct, Three Rivers is still a functioning business. So obviously this application expunges that development and therefore requires the evidence to say why this should stop, rather than being a development that does not stop the business. So they're not comparable in that respect. But so what I've got, I would say, is just on the basis, as Ms. Herner said, just be very conscious of that with allocations, because if we're going to be saying that this is a sustainable location, we are saying that pretty much every single part of the district is sustainable because of apart from Stowe Maris, Dengie, Munden, Old Heath Road, Ashildham, Hazley, Little Blackstead, Bradwell, Waterside and Cots Clark. They're the only places in the district that are found to be lower in that survey. So if we're going to have a line in the sand that is that low on what facilities we require, that will become a material consideration in future, and it's going to make officers' position very difficult, forthcoming appeals and planning applications that, may actually be higher up this list and providing other facilities if we're going to say that these aren't. That's just something I'd like to highlight again, members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And look, we know the officers are not going to agree with what I say. I just want to make one other point, and I listened very hard to Councillor Stevens. It's rather a shame, and with the greatest respect to Councillor Stevens, it's rather a shame she doesn't follow her own advice, because when we were debating a development in Tollesbury, which was recommended by officers for approval, and we had their expert advice, she voted against it, and she did not follow that was compliant with policy, and so she just didn't agree on that case. So you can't have your cake and eat it. But Chairman, I will, and I totally understand why Councillor Stevens would have made that decision, and I probably would have made the same one. But I think let's not preach. Chairman, I propose that we don't go along with the officer's recommendations, that we grant this planning application. And I'm sure between us and Councillor White being very on the ball with her policies, but I think because it's a brownfield site, it qualifies under under section 111 of the MPPF's presumption in favour of sustainable development.
I'll come back before you can.
Yeah.
Through you, Chairman. As always, I'll come back. What I would firstly say is obviously there are multiple reasons for a refusal suggested for this application, and I would advise, as always, that any reason for approval talks to all of them, because otherwise what we are saying right now is if members approve this based on that reason for approval alone, that any brownfield site can be redeveloped for housing irrespective of location, what's on site, whether they've evidenced the loss of why it should be there, ecology, and obviously the section 106 obviously would fall away because we'd require that before the determination. But I would just highlight that those first three reasons for refusal and the additional one on ecology talk about a lot of matters, and such a limited stance on this is previously developed land, we should allow it to be turned into housing, which is what that reason for approval is, would be a ridiculously dangerous reason for approval, because it would be regurgitated again and again at us across an application again and again. And if that's the council's stance, we will not be able to defend any application against any employment site, any piece of built form, basically, any garden space within a settlement boundary, etc. Because this is saying that any previously developed site is acceptable for housing, and that is not, I would advise, not a very safe direction to take the council in. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, well, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to help, Chairman. Yes. So, the ecology we've addressed, in that we don't agree that there is an ecology issue. Employment, again, we don't agree that it's a significant loss of employment. We don't agree that it's a significant loss of a tourist asset. And quite clearly, the current business is not viable. Whether the applicant has proven beyond all doubt, what are we going to do? I can tell you it's not viable. It's not a business I'd take on, that's for certain. And Chairman, I'm sure between us we can come up with some more reasons. Yes, Councillor White is itching to help me.
No, I'm sorry. No, I need a valid proposal from one person, and then we'll look for a seconder. That's how it works.
You've got mine, so whether that's enough is another matter, but now Councillor White can come in with some others.
No, she really can't. The proposer has to make the full proposal in one go.
Through you, Chairman.
Then we'll second it.
Look, Councillor White is going to, if you're going to be like that, Chairman, Councillor White can write them down and I can read them out.
Yeah.
So,
through you, Chairman, my understanding is, from the training that I've witnessed members have, is that at the end of the debate, members should be able to put forward a reason for refusal or reason for approval, etc., based on the debate, and whoever is proposing that puts that forward, and then that is accepted. That is my understanding of what the training is. Thank you, Chairman.
It's what I've done. Whether you agree with them or not is another matter.
Look, hang on, excuse me. I'm running this meeting. Yes, I've had it confirmed by the committee clerk that we can't have collaboration. We have been through this before. We need to demonstrate that the person making the proposal has fully understood what they want to propose and why. Therefore, no collaboration. I accept that you have addressed the reasons for refusal, although there's still no evidence. And when we've got all that, we'll have the actual debate, because this hasn't been a debate so far, it's been a general discussion, and then we can speak for and against the proposal. So, what have you got, Councillor Durham?
It is previously developed land. It is sustainable.
No. Well,
it is adjacent to the existing settlement boundary. It is our belief that there would be a net gain in biodiversity. Yes, and that, as my colleague says, we can condition that. And the other reasons I've said. I mean, Chairman, whether the officers agree, they are the reasons that we're putting forward. And whether you agree, Chairman, with the greatest respect to you in the chair, that's what we have.
I'm not bothered about whether I agree. I only care that they're valid, and what we're lacking is
Well,
evidence.
we think
However,
that-
I
we think they're
believe
valid,
Councillor
Chairman.
Morgan was going to second that. Are you happy to second that proposal?
I am indeed,
Yes?
Chairman. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Stevens, who I suspect wishes to speak against. And as indeed will I in a moment.
Thank you, Chair. I would say, I know we're not here to discuss the Tollsbury application,
Please,
but
please let's not go there.
I would just say that the reason I chose to speak out on that occasion was because something had changed, which was Environment Agency advice. And on this application, nothing has changed. And we can't just suddenly say, oh, well, I know the LDP says that it's an unsustainable development, but tonight we think it is sustainable, because you can't just sort of cherry pick like that.
Unfortunately, we can, and not across the floor, please, members.
I don't think it's not, I can't think of the word, but it's nuts to have, that's not the right word, is it? But to have a policy that says one thing and then suddenly on a whim decide, oh, well, we don't really think it is tonight.
Not across the floor, please.
The only thing I would agree with that's just been said is, yes, it's previously developed land, but there's no evidence that it can't be used for anything else other than housing. It's not in a sustainable location according to our LDP. It's only adjacent to the boundary, not within it, that we don't have the evidence about biodiversity. And so I don't feel that those are compelling reasons for approving this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we've had lots of speech in favour of the proposal, or the gist of the proposal, so I think we'd better put that to the vote. I'm sorry. I have to say I agree. We have no evidence. We have policy requirements for evidence. We have no actual evidence for this proposal, and I cannot support it. So those in favour, Councillor.
This is up for approval, subject to section 106 and then delegated on.
Very true. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Yes, this has to be subject to the S106 and delegated conditions. Sorry, I was taking that as read and I shouldn't have. So those in favour of Councillor Durham's proposal to approve? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 3. Okay. So that proposal is approved. Item 6, any other items of business the Chairman decides are urgent? There are none. Closure of the meeting. Thank you, members and officers, and anyone else involved. I close the meeting at 8:35, and I give up.